Good morning, everyone. We're going to give just a couple of seconds for everyone to get here and then we'll get started. All right. Good morning. Welcome to today's Recovery Summit presentation, Implicit Bias in Substance Use Disorders. This annual webinar series is proudly hosted by St. Clair County Community Mental Health each September in recognition of National Recovery Month, a time to celebrate recovery, raise awareness, and highlight the importance of support and connection. A few quick things I just want to tell you before we get started. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the SCC CMH YouTube channel. Please use the chat box for any questions or comments. Our presenter will address them as time allows. For those requesting continuing education credits, please be sure to remain on the webinar for the full session and complete the survey that will be emailed to you after. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Cole Williams. Cole is the co-founder and is executive director of the Delta Project and a passionate advocate and community leader dedicated to breaking the generational cycle of incarceration and empowering underserved communities. Welcome, Cole.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for having me here this morning. Let's do a tester. So can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect, perfect. So let me get started, right? So one, I got a couple things. If you could put in the chat what you had for breakfast this morning, that would be great. So let everybody know what you had for breakfast this morning. I am having, you talk about self-care. I'm having a glass of Gatorade in a glass. So that's one. And then I've got a plastic bottle of water where I took the tag off. So you don't know what kind of water I'm drinking, but I'm drinking water and it's in a plastic bottle. So that's a whole nother conversation. But put in the chat what you have for breakfast. That's what I'm having for breakfast. So I'm going to do some self-care after this training and go find something to eat because my stomach is growling as I speak. But I also want to just give a fun fact about myself. I was in a tizzy this morning. And I don't know what you're like when you get stressed out about something. Well, I get extremely overwhelmed and my brain, for some apparent reason, does not go into um, I would say calculated mode of just like processing through. I just kind of go all over the place. So I just learned something on my cell phone that I thought I'd share with you guys. So I was preparing for a Zoom meeting. I clicked on something on my phone that says Zoom, and what it did was it actually zoomed in my phone. So all of my text, everything was like extra large, and I did not know how to unzoom it. So I think I called the police for it's a SOS on the phone multiple times, trying to figure out how to like transition my phone back to normal. I literally had to. It taught me. I was able to get on YouTube on my computer and it told me I'm supposed to take three fingers and press twice on my phone in order for it to resume. So that was something I learned in a tizzy that I had when I was stressed out. So that's a fun fact about Cole Williams. Most people don't know that when I get stressed, I get overwhelmed. So moving forward. So my lived experience, I am a father. I now have adult sons. Before my sons became adults, I was once a single teenage father. I became a father at 16 and 17 became a single dad and started my journey into systems. And so I do a lot of work around how do you engage fathers? How do you work with fathers across systems, right? Because I found myself in a variety of systems that I had no real understanding or support around or language for. And so this presentation today will touch briefly on the power of language and why it's so important when we talk about substance use or just when we talk about biases. I also have the pleasure of being a keynote speaker, so I love to travel and do keynote presentations around system involvement, youth and families, and what I've learned along that pathway. But most importantly, I like doing Zoom and virtual, but man, there's something about having the energy of being in person. So my hope is that I will convey some of that same energy in this presentation today. And I am the executive director and co-founder of the nonprofit called the Delta Project. The Delta Project is a organization that we started back in 2020 during the pandemic, and it was really centered around How do we support young people that are at risk at being involved in our juvenile justice system in Grand Rapids? But also, most importantly, how do we support young people that find themselves involved in the juvenile justice system? And so I've had the honor and pleasure of working and walking alongside young people that are in our facilities, also on probation, but also finding themselves at risk at coming in contact with our juvenile justice system. And so we run three programs. One of those programs is called the Young Father Program, where we support young fathers for 20 and under. And we also have a program called Boys to Mentors, which is, I would say, our secret sauce to our organization is that we provide lived experience young people, providing mentoring for young people who find themselves involved in systems. And I would say our Healthy Connections program supports kiddos with mental health and social emotional learning. And one of the things I pride myself and really enjoy doing is hearing the stories of people both on both sides of that coin. So professionals that work in these spaces, but also families and youth that find themselves in the system. So we have a podcast called What I Know Now. So if you're not on your phones, or if you are on your phones, and you want to click on that QR code, it will take you directly to the website where the Delta Project is. And our North Star to the why the program and organization even started was, how do I become something I don't see? Happens to be a question that a young man asked me while I was teaching inside a juvenile detention facility. And it was the spark that ultimately changed my life when it comes to understanding youth that find themselves involved in our systems, as well as what happens to their families. And so we have been working since 2020 to really help find an answer to that question. So I'm glad to be here today to talk about a really important subject matter. And that's really just talking about substance use and biases and how that shows up in our work. So today's objectives is to recognize how implicit bias shapes the way providers perceive and respond to families when substance use disorder, and identify how those perceptions impact treatment outcomes. Apply research-based strategies, including language shifts, bias awareness, and family-centered approaches to reduce those additional stigmas that come when we talk about supporting folks in recovery, but also recognizing that those strategies really can shift the way that we interact with families who find themselves in recovery. And last but not least, is a commitment to one personal change in your practice, language, and your perception, and your giving ourselves accountability to this work. Because I think it's really great that we do this work, but we also have to have some accountability measures that oftentimes must go within ourselves and not always outside of ourselves. So those are the objectives for today. My hope is that I convey these objectives well, and that you walk away with some new information that will support you in the work that you do. So, one of the things I wanted to start us off with was some little research that I found in the National Institutes of Health Digest report. And so I thought this was just really important to set the stage for just hearing, nationally where we are. So in 2023, nearly 19 million U.S. children, that's 1 in 4, lived with at least one parent with a substance use disorder. More than 7.6 million children lived with a parent experiencing moderate to severe substance use disorder, and 3.4 million with multiple SUDs, and over 6 million had a parent with both SUD and a co-occurring mental illness. So I think that's really important when we begin to think about how it's important for us to recognize implicit bias and how it shows up, especially when we think and look at this large number of folks across the U.S. who are impacted or have experienced substance use disorders. So when perception meets implicit bias, I am, oh man, now of course I knew I was going to remember the show I was watching yesterday. Oh yeah, so I'm watching a Netflix special, a documentary on Katrina. It's a documentary on Netflix that just kind of really tells an in-depth story of what happened to the women, children, and families during the Katrina. Um, I'll just say journey or experience, I'm not sure. But in there, one of the things that stood out for me is the word perception. And I thought that was a really important word to really set the stage when we talk about bias, because I think perception is key to all things. It says in this one, for number one, it says perception is how we interpret and make sense of the world around us. So we all have it. right? So we all perceive things based on how we interact with it. How it works, our brains are wired to process huge amounts of information quickly, and to save time and energy, the brain uses shortcuts, learn patterns from culture, media, and personal experiences. And so, as I was watching this documentary and watching the decisions that were made that ultimately impacted the families during the Katrina, it really helped me better understand why it's so important that we understand our biases and how our perceptions show up and how they impact people without even us realizing it, and how our implicit biases can have a detrimental impact on families. So I also wanted to break down perception, right? Perception is how we interpret and make sense of the world. It's not just what we see or hear, it's how our brains filter that information and through experiences, right? Our cultural messages and personal beliefs. And I work with fathers. So a lot of my work is centered around working with fathers, but not just any father. I find myself working with fathers that are incarcerated, but also fathers that have a SUD, right, who have struggled with it or are attempting to find support in recovery. And I had a couple of dads that I was working with, and I primarily work with young fathers. So that is 20 and under. But one time in the jail, I found myself where there were men asking to join the fatherhood class. And these men were ranging from as young as 24 and as wise as 64. Right. And so I usually turn away that age range, but because of the short, I think the attendance of the group that we originally had and the ask and request from some of those fathers that were a little older in age, I had them join the class with some of the younger fathers. And one of the things that one of these fathers shared with me as he was talking about his substance use is that nowhere in his journey, when he was receiving treatment, that he hear or even talk about during his treatment process, the role that he played as a father. And they also shared with me that although they are 64 in age or 34 in age, one of the things that was really important that they shared is that they were also young fathers because their their experiences with using substances prevented them from having the ability to really have real experiences with their children. And so they shared with me that they were actually new and young fathers and that they didn't know a whole lot. And I thought that was really important, and why, I think when we think about recovery, we also have to think about how do we help men and women actually rebuild their lives, right? And so this example is really important. It says two people can look at it, the same father in recovery. One sees a man fighting to rebuild his life, another sees only an addict who can't be trusted. Same person, very different perceptions, right? And so I think it's really important to recognize that we all have these perceptions. They all show up, and it shows up naturally, but we have to be intentional and recognizing those perceptions and be willing to do the work to make sure we truly understand um, how those our perceptions can harm others. So here's a definition of bias. I think most of us know these definitions. So nothing that I'm saying today, you probably haven't already heard, right? So implicit bias occurs when individuals make judgments about people based on certain characteristics without even realizing they're doing it. It's really natural. So, and these are some of the ways in which we do it: skin color, gender, age, generally what people think when they consider biases, but individuals can harbor unconscious prejudice about a variety of things. So some of those things might be height, weight, marital status, foreign accents. Do you own a home? What college football team you like? Right. So there are, or what school did you go to? Right. So all of these biases show up naturally in our everyday life. And then here's just an image of a couple examples that really highlight what biases and implicit bias looks like for us. So we all have them, right? So why does this matter when we're talking about this work, right? And so one of the questions I sometimes have for people, when you hear the word substance use, what comes to mind for you? But when you hear substance use, our minds may instantly picture certain types of people, right? These associations come from repeated images in media, family stories, and policies that we've grown up with, right? And I think that's just important to note that every message around us gives us maybe an image or a story about a particular person or thing, right? That's why I think it's really important that narrative story work is so key to this work when we think about bias, and how they show up, is because media has a great way of crafting and telling a story. And based on what you see in media, it will make you believe that what you see is actually the reality. And the truth of the matter, it isn't. And so, again, that's why it's so important to understand how we automatically think, when we think about how our biases show up, and why that's really important and how harmful it can be. It says how it works, bias becomes invisible. Most people don't say out loud, fathers with addiction don't deserve support. It's rare that I've ever heard anybody say that, right? And if someone did say that, it probably would happen in a space where they felt safe enough to unpack that thought, and that they wouldn't be judged by saying that, right? But if the bias is running underneath awareness, it can quietly, as it says, influence actions, denying a dad a chance at treatment, overlooking his role as a parent, and assuming relapse equals failure. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone talk about an individual relapsing, and how the professional just feels like, man, they failed. And I think we've done a great job when I think about what we've done across the state in terms of really looking at biases, and providing training for professionals so that they can properly engage families. But there are still instances and moments where our biases creep up and show up. And I think that we have to have measures in place to make sure, again, that folks are not harmed by those things. So here are a couple of common myths, and misconceptions about biases that I think are really important to just kind of lead into. It says, I don't have biases. I don't know about you, if you've heard this before, but I think before I started understanding implicit bias and doing trainings, I didn't think I had any biases either, right? I don't have a bias about people. I care about all people. This is why I do the work, right? And sure enough, I'll tell a story in this presentation, but sure enough, I had a lot of biases and still do. I'm now just a little bit more aware of them, and I share them out loud. Maybe sometimes in spaces that I probably shouldn't, right? So I'll share a couple of them. But it says here, everyone does have everyone does have it. Everyone does. It's about awareness and impact, right? Talking about mental health makes things worse. We know that's not true. Talking openly can reduce shame and encourage healing, right? And so I think that's another thing where we have to create spaces for people to feel safe, not only the clients that we serve, but also the professionals that are doing the work, right? It says talking about biases makes people defensive. Silence lets bias continue. Naming it creates change. And I think that's also an important statement to hear, right? Because I think anytime we hear anything connected to race or implicit or explicit biases, there are instantly, for some people, there can be walls that are built up because, well, will this be a training that's about shaming? Will this be a guilt trip? How do I process what I'm feeling? And oftentimes what I tell people is that we have to just talk about it, right? And I would say probably some of the most difficult conversations I've had to have had to be with people that I cared about the most, right? And then over time, having those difficult conversations with people that I cared about the most allowed me to be able to go into the work setting and have those very same conversations with people that I work alongside day in and day out. And so I think these are the opportunities where at home you practice some of this stuff so that you can utilize some of those tools that you learn, or vice versa, right? Biases only shows up in obvious discrimination. No, it often appears subtle in tone, questions, and assumptions. I remember someone telling me one day, and I know I was early 20s. Someone said to me, "Man, Cole, you are so articulate." And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, wow, that's such a great compliment." Until someone pointed out to me, Cole, that is not a compliment at all, right? And I hadn't even really thought about it. But again, sometimes it's subtle. You don't think about, I don't even think the person that actually said it was actually being was even mindful or aware that what they were saying was could be seen as harmful. But I think at the moment they were complimenting me, and I think they didn't realize that that compliment wasn't actually a compliment at all, right? And so I think again that bias that they had about a person of color like myself, being able to articulate English well seemed to be something that was unfamiliar to them. And I don't know where they got those messages from. It could be a variety of things, right? That we know all to be true. But it led to that discussion and have me having that moment and me thinking at the time with my own lack of education and awareness, as at that time in my early 20s, I had never done anything that was connected to bias, let alone even heard the word bias, or microaggressions, right? And so here I'm having this lived experience and not recognizing that that was a challenge or something that was harmful to me. And then once recognizing that that wasn't a compliment, then trying to process through my thoughts about how do I make sure that that doesn't happen again? How do I make sure that I'm educated enough to bring awareness to others if something like that does happen? And then thinking about how many times has this person made that statement to someone of color without even realizing that that was not a compliment at all, right? And so I think one of the things I've also had to learn in this work is to make sure that I lean in or cancel out. Maybe that's a better word, to not cancel out people when we show up in ways of lack of information, while at the same time holding people accountable by saying just because you don't have the information doesn't mean that it's okay, right? What's okay is that we do this work together and we learn together and we try our best to practice, but we do recognize that some of this work we stumble into it, so it isn't going to be perfect. It isn't always going to come out right, but I think that if we're doing this work with the understanding that we're human and we're learning together, then it creates an opportunity for the relationship to grow and to establish some accountability and some tools that will allow us to continue to have these kinds of conversations. And I think that's really, really important. I've raised 8 sons. And I'm telling you, there were a lot of conversations I've had to have that have required me being uncomfortable. And I think these are just those conversations that we can have together. So if you've had heard me present this before, then you would know this person is an example of myself as a driver and the bias that I carry. So I have a bias against drivers, certain drivers in particular. So this is me in my vehicle driving, I want to say maybe close to 80 miles an hour in my little Chevy Cruze at the time. And people laugh at me because I'm like 6'2" and I'm in my Chevy Cruze. So just the fact that you're laughing at me and because of my height, I feel like that's a bias too, but I'm not gonna go there, right? So I'm in my Chevy Cruze. I'm driving 80 or maybe under 80 a little bit. This is just an visual example. But I also have my teenage son in the car with me in the passenger side. Now I'm in the fast lane driving about 75, and there's a car that's pushing me to move and move faster than I want to. Now I'm not going into the slow lane, right? Because I don't really feel like I want to do that. I want to keep at the pace, and I'm mad that someone's pressuring me to move. And so I don't even look in my rearview mirror. I simply say to my son, you know what? That's got to be a crazy woman that's driving that vehicle behind us. My son does not look up. He doesn't respond. He doesn't say anything to me about the statement that I just made. He just continues doing whatever he was doing. I think he might have been on his cell phone, so I'm sure he probably didn't even hear me. But I think I've said it enough times, or he's even experienced it enough times that me saying it, that he didn't even think much about it, right? So I said it, didn't think much about it, was irritated, right? So the car speeds up and speeds behind, speeds past me because finally I move into the slow lane. Now, the question I have for you is that who do you think was driving the car behind me, right? Do you think it was a woman? Do you think it was a man? Do you think it was a child, a teenager, right? Well, it happened to be a woman, right? And so when I saw this woman driver pass me by, driving, I want to say 90 miles an hour, I instantly said to myself, see, I told you. I confirmed the bias. Seeing the image of the person confirmed the bias for me. And that was all I needed to know to continue with the bias that I had, right? Now, some of you that are on here saying, oh, I cannot believe he is saying that out loud. I am saying it out loud because it is a bias that I have. I've learned it. Have lived experience of having some of the most amazing women in my life drive in a really interesting kind of ways. So I'm look at me trying to soften what I just said up, right? And in my mind, I'm like, my mom drives like this, my sister drives like this. So I've learned and watched them drive. So of course, this is how women drive, right? And that's really how the biases show up. It was automatic. I didn't think anything of it. The person that was sitting next to me was my son. He didn't challenge the bias that I said, the statement that I made. No one challenged me. No one said, hey, Cole, I don't necessarily think that you should say that about all women. There was no one there to hold me accountable. But that's the important part of this training, right? Because the end goal is that there shouldn't be anyone holding us accountable. We should be able to hold ourselves accountable to those statements, right? And a part of my accountability is to say out loud the bias that I have, and that I carry with me, and that I'm aware of it. And that's part of having this discussion is that it was difficult to say that. And I've said that in rooms where I'm like, oh my goodness, I already know the surveys that I'm about to get back, they probably won't have me come back, right? But I think in looking at this, I think it's really important to unpack that. And so that's my bias, right? I've gotten better, but there are times when it automatically hits me, and I'm like, okay, Cole, let's check that. Where's that coming from? Why is that okay? And let's try to heal through that. And so constantly what I find myself doing when it does happen is I have to talk myself through that process. And it's something I think that we have to regularly do, right? I can't tell if anybody laughed at that. I can't tell if anybody was just like, I can't believe he shared that. That's the part of virtual that drives me mad. But if you do have some thoughts about that, drop it in the chat for me as well, and I definitely will take a look at it at the end. But I think that's just important. I think we should be aware of our biases. Now, this training and the variety of trainings that you'll get around biases, there is a lot of terminology that's connected to it. We know the neuroscience that is connected to how our brains work and function when it comes to biases. But I think at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is we just bring it down to a human level, is that we have them. We should be talking about them when they show up to ourselves, even, and then just recognize the impact and the stigma that's connected to it, right? Because I think stigma is also key to healing, right? It says, why does stigma hurt? Because stigma discourages people from getting help, and it creates shame and silence. And I think that shows up in a lot of ways, right? When we think about how we may perceive others, and their reasons for not necessarily getting the support that they need. So what can we do? One of the things we talked about is using person first language, respectfully, a person with depression, not a depressed person, right? Again, look at that. Uh, and when you think about that, right? And that's why language is so important, because I think that's another part of this work that took me a while to understand as a human being going through so many systems, is that there were so many acronyms, there were so many um, terms that people naturally just used because it's a part of their work language, right? And so I think sometimes until you get into the flow of it, you'll start to pick up that terminology and use that language too. And sometimes forget that there are people around you that don't know what all those things mean, right? And so I think that that was a barrier for me in the systems that I was involved in as a father, navigating, because sometimes I just didn't understand the language. And if you don't understand the language, what happens? You get disengaged, you get discouraged. There could be some shame and guilt that's connected to that, right? And there's no one walking alongside you sometimes to help you understand or process it, right? So again, one of the things we can do is recognize the language that we use, be mindful of how that language is, how it shows up and how it impacts others. And it also talks about here, it says normalize seeking therapy or help, support friends instead of judging them and educating others. I think that's part of this thing too. I used to tell the kids that I work with, the more you know, the more you owe. And I still hold true to that. I think oftentimes there are a lot of people don't get an opportunity to go to trainings, and there are a lot of people that don't have access to the information. And so what we can do is be good stewards of the information by not just having the training, right, and participating in it by showing up, but actually taking the information and going to the spaces that are just like when you're walking into your home and there's someone there and you're sharing some of the information that you've learned, right? I think that's one great way to pass this information along, so that everyone around you gets that support. Had my son had this training or information from a bias training, I think he could have had the tools he needed to just say, "Hey, Dad, I don't think that's appropriate," right? And that would have given me a pause, right, to sort of take a step back and say, "Well, what do you mean?" And we could have had some dialogue and conversation, but I didn't take that information back home with him to practice with him to talk to him about it. Thus, he didn't have the tools to have that conversation. And what I'm learning when it comes to bias is that this doesn't happen just at your workplace. These things are showing up in your homes, in your car rides, at the store, while you're walking down the street, in your neighborhood. So again, we're talking about it from the angle of substance abuse disorders. But the truth of the matter is, it's really in our everyday interactions with others. I can't tell you how many times my biases pop up in a variety of ways every day, right? And sometimes I'm aware of it, and sometimes I'm often not aware of it. So yeah. So let me go get back on this. Get back onto the slide here. So stigma and the treatment gap. It says addiction is more stigmatized than mental illness, smoking, or obesity. In healthcare settings, stigma has been shown to be a barrier to treatment. One review found that over 80% of individuals with alcohol use disorder did not access treatment. Language matters. Using terms like abuse or abuser significantly increases stigma, affecting how providers perceive, engage, or treat individuals. Just in words, right? And again, how many words do we use a day? How many things do we say without oftentimes thinking about what we say? How many words do we use to write and describe people that we walk alongside or work with when they come into our offices? And so we really have to be intentional about the words that we use and the language that we use. And again, it's harmfulness or it's care. I think when I think about substance use disorders, I think also about care and how do we care? And that care happens in the way that we interact with the words and the information that we learn, and our checks and balances with our own biases. You'll probably hear me say that a couple times in this training. So I don't know if you're familiar with John Kelly's work at Harvard when it comes to the Recovery Research Institute. But I really wanted to share some of Dr. Kelly's work because I think it really helps shape some of this for me too. So I'll read it. It says Dr. Kelly is one of the leading addiction researchers in the U.S. His work often looks at language, stigma, and recovery outcomes. Key findings in a landmark 2010 study, providers were asked to read case vignettes that describe the same person in two ways: substance abuser, person with a substance use disorder, right? When the label was substance abuser, providers were more likely to recommend punitive measures, jail, punishment, etc. When it was person with SUD, providers leaned toward treatment and support. Why might that be, right? Why might we see two different things, substance abuser and person with substance use disorder, in two different ways? Well, we know why. I think of oftentimes the best way to describe some of this is if I were to say, hey, if I were in your city or in your town and I was looking for the big yellow arch as a restaurant to go to, or most people would tell me McDonald's. Why? Because their branding was excellent. If I say just do it, most people would know that just do it is connected to Nike, right? It's branding, it's marketing, it's how you tell the story, it's how you push the message out there, so that it's stuck in the brain, right? And so those messages have impact. When I think of a substance abuser, depending on where I'm at with my education, my language, depending on my proximity to people and connection to therapists or clinicians or just people in my community, depending on the community in which I live in, I'm going to have a very different view of a substance abuser and a person with substance use disorder. And that shows up, right? And I think we sometimes are like, no, it doesn't. Oh, it does. It absolutely does, right? And so it's just important to think about that and its impact, because if I see it one way and my proximity to power or authority or decision making power, that it could determine a negative outcome from a person based on my viewpoint or my experiences just in those two descriptions, right? And why does this matter? It says that a single word can push professionals toward punishment. Imagine what happens when we frame a father as an addict instead of a dad struggling with SUD. It shows how biases in language can erase the humanity and the parenthood of men you work with. And again, I'm only using fathers as an example in this presentation because I personally work with dads. And I happen to work with fathers who are struggling with substance use disorders. And if we were in the room together and this was in person, we would definitely unpack this a little bit. So Dr. Helena um, Hansen from UCLA did a different study that I thought was important to share with you about race and addiction, and when we think about opiates, the opiate crisis. And it says Dr. Hansen looks at race addiction in health systems, especially how opiate addiction has been portrayed in policy and media. A key insight from her book, White Opiates: when opiate use surged in white suburban middle class communities, the crisis was framed as a public health emergency, right? Needing compassion and treatment. The impact, right? And I don't even have the second part of that, right? So if I were to say, when you think about the opiate crisis, I don't even know if it was described as an opiate crisis when we thought about Black and brown people who were experiencing, I'm going to say, the opiate crisis, right? I don't think we thought about them in the same framing, which this book illustrates in her work. So it talks about white parents are more likely to be seen as deserving treatment. Black and brown parents are more likely to be seen as irresponsible or criminal, with child removal or prison as the response, right? And again, our biases have a real lasting impact and harmful impact to certain communities. And I don't think we can dismiss that, and why we have to consistently and constantly have these types of conversations and discussions, right? What I hope to happen from these trainings that you have is that these conversations just don't happen through a webinar. Again, that these conversations are happening in the places that you frequent and you love the most. I would probably stay away from, I don't know, most people are stressed during the holidays, right? So we want to avoid anything that will push those buttons for others. But I do think that there are periods and experiences in our journeys in time that we can have these discussions, or just being aware by educating ourselves. One of the things that I wanted to write about or place in here too, where it says why this matters is through this lens, is that families of color with SUD are stigmatized first by addiction bias and second by racialized biases. And this often fuels policies and practices that oftentimes can remove children from families instead of repairing those relationships. Especially when I think about the dads that I serve and work alongside, is that this is often some of the conversations that they've had, that um, they've done classes that are connected to their healing and their work around addiction, but their struggle around parenting and understanding their roles as a dad um, oftentimes goes underlooked. So biases in substance use disorder. So what did their research highlight? I think John Kelly's research showed that just one word abuser made professionals choose punishment over treatment. Again, and there's a reason why that might be. I'm sorry, not a reason, but a host of reasons why that is, right? And Dr. Hansen's showed that one skin color, black or brown, made society choose prison over compassion. If one word and one perception can change everything, what does that mean for the families that you work with, right? Again, the goal for me is to make sure that we think about these things, but we also internalize these things from a standpoint of how does this show up in my work, right? How can I better use language that is equitable? How do I make sure that the things that I say and that I do and the things that I write reflect um, the true healing and care that we signed up to do when we signed up to serve and work along with families. Something else to just provide. It says provider-focused solutions to reduce biases in SUD work. So again, you're going to hear me say this, check your language. What do? Use person first, which is strength-based language. Say father in recovery versus addict, right? And this is happening. And again, I don't think a lot of people are saying this, at least I don't think, right? They're saying this in professional settings. And maybe they are, right? And I think that again, this is an opportunity for us to learn something different and new. But I think we may hear these things happening outside of the workspace that comes naturally when we're just automatically thinking and saying things that reflect what we're feeling, right? So say parent working toward reunification versus non-compliant client. Normalize relapse. It says why relapse rates in SUD is 40 to 60% mirror diabetes and hypertension, yet providers often treat it as failure. What to do? Reframe relapse as a signal for adjusted care instead of punishment. I love that. So it's adjusted care. We're adjusting things, right? We're doing a reset. I think reframing and strength-based language makes sense, and we should always be using that, although it isn't often something that we do naturally because it requires a lot of intentionality to operate and use that type of language when we're working not only with others but even in just how we use strength-based language to communicate our own selves and what we think about ourselves. So this is just another example of, I would say, like I said, the first question I asked you this morning is, what did you have for breakfast? I didn't have anything for breakfast. Now, mind you, I probably should have. I had access to a toaster. I could have made some toast. I even have a brown banana I could have eaten if I wanted to. But I was so busy with everything I had on going on this morning that I didn't take the time out. And I think this is why these kinds of things are important, because I can't ask you to do this work if you're not taking the time out to actually understand why you think the way that you think, why you believe the things that you believe, right? That takes intentionality and care for oneself to spend the time to actually understand why I do and say the things I do and say, right? And so, just like anything, we talk a great deal about, I think these professions and these places that I've been in with professionals around self-care is so amazing to me because we talk about doing it, but the practice is really hard, especially when you're serving people that in so many ways are struggling themselves. And so I often tell people, being on the flip side of that and being a parent of spaces where professionals are coming into my home and interacting with me and giving me advice, you have to practice some of that stuff too, right? And then I'll just end with this, right? It says examine hidden assumptions. And I think this was really just important in both Dr. Helen's work, as well as in Dr. Kelly's work. I think it's really key and important to recognize what we do matters. So before making a decision, pause and ask, would I see this as in the same way if this parent were in of a different race or class or gender? That takes a lot of intentionality to be able to do, to take the pause, to take the time to actually sit with myself and ask myself a number of questions before I make a decision, right? And that's important. I think in a lot of the work that we do, we often tell people to take time when we're doing breath work. We often have to do the breath work too. And that is in our decision making around how we show up with our biases. The impact it creates accountability for your own bias in real time, right? In real time. I think that's important. So, a couple things that I think is important to share out with you too is bringing awareness to our unconscious bias and taking actions that cross-check our initial assumptions can help to limit such negative consequences that I've talked about. So, here's a couple of tips that I think is important around breaking barriers um, for addressing personal bias. Self-awareness. Again, it's hard to be self-aware if your schedule was jam-packed with a host of things and you don't take the time to practice some of your own care. So reflect on your own thoughts and behaviors to recognize any biases you may hold. This can be achieved through regular self-assessment and mindfulness. Let me I tell y'all, I thought mindfulness was just just being mindful of others. That's kind of what I thought mindfulness was. It took me a while to understand that mindfulness also means being mindful of yourself and taking purposeful moments to be present. That's something you have to learn. That's not some, when I tell you my mother did not know, she didn't teach that at all because she didn't know to teach that. Right. And so here again, I'm picking up these biases from these adults around me as children, as we all do, without sometimes those adults having this education and these tools. Right. And so that's why you'll probably hear me say over and over again why these kinds of conversations don't just need to happen in the workplace, but they also have to happen at home. Because it would have been great if my uncle or my aunt would have had these tools because these were the folks that I was around on an everyday basis that really helped set the tone and the stage for how I saw the world around me. And then the media, so things that we watched on television. So I never saw people practicing self-awareness. Or if I did, I never heard anybody use the language that connected it. Again, there's power in language. So to know that there are people in this profession that are on this call who are doing, all the work that you do when it comes to strengthening your toolkit. These are some of the things that I think the people that you love also have to have access to. And a lot of times that's really by hearing you talk about it and hearing you use the language. And even if you don't think people are paying attention, man, you'd be surprised. I paid attention to the folks that came into my home that described themselves as professionals who were doing the work. I paid attention to the clinician, although I did not like some of the things that the clinician was suggesting because I wasn't ready to do the work. I still was listening, right? And so those are opportunities. So this education, right? So the more education that you learn and you gather, again, the more you know, the more you owe. So share it. I'd also go far as say seek feedback. Feedback is so helpful, right? Ask for honest feedback from colleagues, friends, and mentors about biased behaviors you may exhibit. That might be hard because you might learn some things that you didn't even know that you were saying or doing, right? Um, I went back to talk to my son about that. And he was like, Dad, I didn't even think about it. But you said it a lot. But he had those same biases collected along his journey because he also saw this with the women that was in his life. And so we had to have, again, that was generational passed down. So here I'm thinking, man, here I am trying to collect and understand my own bias. And I've actually just passed this bias down to my son without even realizing it. And I'm educated and I know better. And so I think, again, once I moved away from blaming myself, shaming myself, and saying all the things I just said, right? I'm educated. I ought to know better. And started to just recognize that, oh, shoot, yeah, I'm human. We all have them. What do I do with it now? Okay, we have to talk about it. So again, one of those ways you do that is you challenge those assumptions. When you catch yourself making assumptions about someone based on their appearance, background, or other characteristics, stop and questions those assumptions. Consider alternate viewpoints and evidence. Right? I mean, the world we live in, man, our social media, the things that we watch, it all gives us messages about what's happening about people and in the world around us. So how we can do a better job of what we watch and what we show and what we say. Exposure to diversity, engage with people from different backgrounds and experiences. Building relationships with diverse individuals can help break down the stereotypes and broaden your understanding. Look, again, we know this, but the challenge is, how do you do that? How do you do that if you have social anxiety? How do you do that if you have anxiety? How do you do that if you are an introvert? How do you do that with, you could just add on and on. How do I do this stuff? One of the things you do is you do it the way that you do anything that you're trying to do differently. You take a chance, right? And you use chances with empathy. It says put yourself in others' shoes to understand their experiences and feelings. And this can help you appreciate their perspective and reduce prejudice attitudes. I was traveling recently, actually, just traveling yesterday, and I was on a plane. And when I tell y'all, I do not like sitting in the middle. I'm 6'1", 246 pounds, broad shoulders, and that middle seat on the plane, especially if you don't get the seats right after first class. Now, I'm not making first class money to get on, to be, I want to. And I got my issues with first class people too. Again, my biases creep in. I'm like, how? No, that's a whole nother. See, I'm exposing, but that middle seat exposes you to the person to the left and right of you. And I have had to ask myself, do I want to engage with folks? Because you sit at the one place you will experience diversity is transportation. If you're doing public transportation or you are traveling by way of train or an airplane, it gives you an opportunity to see people in a very diverse way. Whether you're sitting at the airport and you are watching people, or you're at a restaurant watching people and creating stories and narratives about them, we are all doing it. And I will tell you, why am I telling y'all a story about me sitting in the middle? One, I don't like it. And two, exposure to diversity. I was sitting next to two people and I wanted to engage, but I was like, I'm too tired, so I'm not engaging with them. And I had to give myself permission to say I'm not engaging. So what I'm also saying to you with all this is that you don't have to, most people do a training and they'll just like run into, okay, I'm gonna start doing all this stuff. No, pace yourself, one, but two, recognize it's a journey. This is something that you don't do. I mastered it in 2 weeks. Now I got it. I'm good. It's something that you do every day. It's bite sizing it. And so the next time I get on a plane, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm not doing first class just yet. But if I happen to sit in the middle of the aisle or the window seat, I'm gonna try my best to try to engage with somebody in the space if they're open to it, because they may say, "Hey, I don't want to talk to you either." We okay. But again, practicing mindfulness, being aware, being present, is really important. So practice mindfulness, excuse me, to become more aware or of immediate reactions and thoughts. This awareness can help you catch and address biases in the moment. And one of the things I think is just important, man, is commit to change. And change is hard. I said I'm 246 pounds. Y'all listen, I cannot stop drinking simply lemonade. Or what is it called? Minute Maid. I got a Minute Maid fruit punch. I can't get rid of the sugar drinks. If I could just get rid of those sugar drinks, I would do so good. I'm also a, what do they call that person when you haven't eaten and you get angry? Is it hangry? Oh man, my sweet spot is food. And someone just said to me recently, you will just eat anything that's in front of you, won't you? Whether you like it or not, even if you're not hungry, you'll just eat. And I really had to process that because one, I didn't need you giving me that kind of feedback, right? We don't do well with feedback. But secondly, I thought to myself, man, I'm trying to lose this weight. I can't seem to get it. I love sweet drinks. And what I just said to myself, I'm gonna pace myself. So you see, I got some Gatorade, and this is the Gatorade with sugar. I don't know how to drink that Gatorade with that non-sugar. That just it doesn't work well. But I also have some water. So I'm trying to balance it out. And that's all I'm suggesting to you is that you balance it out and you at least commit to the change, right? I'm committed to drinking the Minute Maid fruit punch. I finished the carton yesterday, so I'm not gonna drink anything. Yeah, I said a carton. No judgment. This is judgment-free zone. So I'm not gonna drink any Minute Maid fruit juice at all today. I'm committed to this Gatorade and this little cup of Gatorade and water. So we're gonna see what's happening. Also, it says promote inclusivity. Man, that was hard. So advocate for and support inclusive practices in your workplace, community, and personal life. Encourage diverse voices and perspectives in decision-making processes. So again, one of the ways you can do that, do this at home. Do this with whoever's at your home, who's ever in your neighborhood. Practice this with the people that are the closest to you. Sometimes those are the best, sometimes the safest spaces for us, even as adults. Continuous learning, recognize the power of learning and putting this stuff into practice. And then again, that learning is it's a continuum. It doesn't have to stop and end because you took a training. You just continue to do it. And the question I love, it says, what's one intentional shift you can commit to today in the words you use, the way you practice, or the lens you see through that will give a client a fairer chance to be seen for who they are and not just their struggles. Let's think about that. What's one intentional shift you can commit to today? And again, Doesn't have to be a heavy commitment. It doesn't have to be if you felt something that convicted you that now you have to go and go on Amazon and buy 13 books to like now start to do this work. Just pace it. If you want to do 13 books to have them on order, that's fine too. But sometimes we get into this stuff and we also forget that we are human and this is all, we're all trying to figure this out together. But we can do it in a way that doesn't cause additional harm to others, especially when those others come to us for support. So again, the work that I do that I love doing is connected to young people that are involved in our juvenile justice system and our child welfare system and our community mental health systems who are struggling too with substance abuse disorders. But most importantly, these are young people that I work alongside um, who are just trying to figure it out too. And so I think that there's room for adults and young people and all of us who are just trying to figure this thing out to continue to work together to figure it out. I don't think it's that complex, y'all. I think I know what my stuff is. I know what I have to do. I know who I need to have in my corner that will support me and hold me accountable. Sometimes maybe in a gentle way if I need that, and sometimes in a straightforward way if I need that too. But I think we know who our circles are. I think we know what our biases are. I think we know what we need to work on. I just think that I hope this 1 hour training just gives you a little support or a little edge in just recognizing, hey, don't have to have shame around it. Don't have to feel guilty about it. You just have to recognize that you have them and be okay talking about them with people that you feel secure around and feel support around. So that when you do have to have those difficult discussions in spaces where you don't necessarily feel that support, you have built up enough in that jar of yours to be able to bounce back from those kinds of challenges. And then the end goal for me and all the work that I do is that no one is harmed um, in the work that we do to support them. So thank you. Um, thank you, St. Clair County, for inviting me in this space with you. I hope some of you laughed. If not, I got to continue to work on my jokes because laughter is also the key to healing, and often laughter also helps us with difficult challenges and conversations. So continue to laugh, continue to heal, and continue to practice some of the work that you'll be learning through all these trainings that are provided to you. And then again, when you know it, you share it. I think that's how we make things better in the world we live in today. So I will open it up for any questions that you have. I think we've got a couple minutes left. And then I'm off to go find me some breakfast. I might do a little brunch or something. So we'll see. Or lunch. Maybe that's where I'm headed to. So any questions? And if there are if someone could share with me um, what we have in the chat.
There's a lot of thank yous in the chat. Great presentation. I'm just trying to scroll through. There's a lot of coming through right now. This was fabulous, they said. I
Fabulous.
laughed
I
and
like that
kept me
word.
engaged. Doesn't look like any questions, though. Let me just go back down to the bottom.
Yeah,
Awesome presentation. Thank you. It says, thank you so much. You did great.
thank you.
Oh, it does say, how do I address family with IB? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I was gonna say what is
Piper, if you can come back on and tell us what IB is. Implicit bias. I guess we should have known that, right?
who said that? Was that you said Piper?
Yeah.
Piper, that was yeah, of course IB means implicit bias. See that language? The question is how do you address it with
Let's see.
how do you address it with
How do you
families?
address family that has implicit bias?
You know what? I often tell people too, connection is key. So if you have a connection with the family, you can almost address anything with connection. So I always say, if you don't have connection yet, establish that before you move into anything that's connected to, I don't want to say compliance because that doesn't sound right from what I'm thinking about. But I often say connection allows us the ability to be able to say the things that we would feel maybe uncomfortable addressing. But I think once you have that connection, and two, depending on your families, some families you could be straightforward if you say it in a way that comes from a place that's sincere. And I think that's the other part of this work too. People are people, so people can usually tell if you're coming from a space that isn't connected to empathy or isn't connected to that. So as long as you're coming from that space, and you know the family well and you're connected, you can have all these kinds of conversations with them.
All right. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you so much for the presentation. Your time and expertise, is greatly appreciated. I don't think I see any other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for the time, and
So
I
I just want
appreciate
to
you
thank
having me.
yeah. I also want to thank everyone else for joining today. We hope you found this information meaningful and useful in your work and daily life. Today's presentation is one of many webinars scheduled throughout the month of September as part of our Recovery Summit. To explore upcoming sessions and register, please visit our website at www.sccmh.org under the Events tab. Before you go, we greatly appreciate your feedback. A short survey will be emailed to you following this session. Your input is vital in helping us continue to improve and shape future events. For those requesting McBAP and peer credits, certificates will be emailed out by mid-October. If you're requesting social work CEs, your certificate will be emailed to you after payment is received, if applicable. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next session.